All right, welcome. This is my recorded lecture for the filled Maya 3 notes. So we're going to review those notes, and then we're going to just use those to hop in and make a Rubik's Cube, starting from a basic primitive cube. So reminder to my people here with me live, you can throw things in the chat, / you can unmute, and I will hear you on my AirPod. You won't be recorded, so that's all you really need to know about that. Okay. So I am going to start with going over repeat last. So our last set of notes was about what we call the extrude tool. And so if Maya 1 was one leg of our tripod and Maya 2 about extrude was the second leg of our tripod, the insert edge loop tool makes the third leg of the tripod, that is Maya fundamentals. So the basic move, scale, rotate tools, the extrude tool, and now today the insert edge loop tool. Okay, so before I get into insert edge loop tool, repeat last is something that is useful with Maya. I forgot that I meant to add this to the Maya 2 notes as it is, but so now it's on the Maya 3 notes. Repeat last. So if I have a cube here and I want to do multiple extrudes in a row, I can just use G to repeat my last tool. So I have this face selected on top of my cube. I could hit the extrude and now tap the scale cube, scale it in, hit G, extrude this up again, hit G, tap the scale cube and scale this out, hit G for another extrude, hit G for another extrude, and just keep going along my way that way. So again, G for repeat last. Now, another thing to point out though is that if you're using this method to what we talked about is very important on the last notes about extrude, when you undo a repeat last extrude, instead of saying undo poly extrude, it's going to say undo repeat last. It means, you know, what, depending on the context, that will mean a lot of things, but if you're undoing an extrude, you want it to say undo repeat last, and that will tell you you undid the extrude that you set. Okay? So, the new stuff for today, in fact, I'm going to undo that back there. Okay, so the new stuff for today is insert edge loop. So if extrude creates new faces from your existing faces, essentially insert edge loop subdivides your already existing faces into new, smaller faces from the original. So extrude, create new faces out of the old faces. Insert edge loop tool is for turning new, old faces or existing faces into new, smaller faces. So what it looks like, so insert edge loop tool is under the mesh tools menu. So as a reminder from earlier in the year, this is basically our home base here in the mesh tool or the mesh menus. Mesh, edit mesh, and mesh tools. So this is the first of the mesh tools that we're going to work with. So I'm going to go down to insert edge loop tool. And you'll notice that along the side here, there's also these little tool settings, option boxes, as I call them. So we'll talk about those in a second. So for right now, I'm just going to click insert edge loop tool. And it's telling me click drag on edges. So what that will do is when I click on an edge, you can see it's drawing in a loop of edges all the way around that object. Now, it's important to note that it can only split quadrilaterals into two new sets of quadrilaterals. So that is to say four-sided faces. So for those of you that are unfamiliar. Now, let me also show you, I have not clicked anything else. So my active tool, just like the move tool, scale tool, rotate tool, is still the insert edge loop tool. So if I click on my object, it's going to add an edge loop. So I'm like, uh-oh, it's adding edges. So first of all, just undo. And then secondly, when you are done with your tool, you need to move to another tool. So in the case of insert edge loop, because I no longer want to add new tools or edge loops, I can hit Q for the select tool, which is my when in doubt reminder. When in doubt, press Q to go to the select tool, go into object mode, click in the background, everything's reset, right? So same token, when you're done with the insert edge loop tool, whoops. Oh, my zoom buttons, go away. There we go. Mesh tool, oh. I hit smooth on accident. Mesh tools. So when I hit this, I add my edge loop and I'm done. I just hit Q, or I could hit R for scale, you know, if I was trying to do that too. So whatever floats your boat. Now, a point I just made a second ago. Here's a cylinder. I'm going to take my insert edge loop tool. If I try and split it this way, no problem. All quadrilaterals all the way around, so it can perfectly bisect them into two new areas. No worries. Thanks for showing up. So the other way, if I try and do it horizontally though, by splitting this new edge that I put in here, well, you'll see that it terminates at the triangles at the top and bottom of my cylinder. And again, reminder, it can only bisect a quadrilateral into, I guess bisect's the wrong word. It can only split a quadrilateral into two new quadrilaterals. If it hits a triangle, it terminates there. However, by terminating there and adding a vertice, it is now a quadrilateral, even though this still looks like a triangle, right? It's a triangular shape, but it is not a triangle. It's a quadrilateral. So if I try and split this now, you'll see that now it splits this face and goes to the other edge. So again, now this is a quadrilateral and this is a quadrilateral. So if I try and split here, you'll see this splits here. This is now also a quadrilateral on this side, so it splits back around and goes back around. So be careful. We're starting to get into the space where operator error is the name of the game. Maya can only screw it up so much. So a lot of it is just getting used to it, making mistakes yourself, and learning from them. And I do want to stress that enough. Or I can't stress that enough. It comes from making mistakes yourself and learning from them. I've definitely had to remake entire models from scratch because I've just been like, I spent like 5 hours figuring out how to make all of this stuff, but my geometry is so horrible. I just need to do it over and do it the right way from scratch. So just make mistakes. We're early on in the year. Now's the time to make them, not when you're trying to do your final at the end of the semester. You'll make mistakes then. You want to make less of them, though, is the point. Okay, so that is insert edge loop tool. So in theory, pretty straightforward. Splits in a bunch of edges into your object. So, and that might be useful for things like, before I go forward, so, you know, like we add this edge here, and then I switch to my scale tool, and now I can, you know, spread this out like this, add one here, and then I can go select these faces here, you know, do something along those lines, etc. So it allows you much more custom control of your shape by adding edges, and then you can choose to do what you want to do with those edge loops or the vertices that make them up. Now, what if you want to add more than one edge loop at a time? Or what if you want to perfectly bisect something? I did use that term a second ago. Perfectly bisect something. Then you want to use what we call are the tool settings in the options box. So I want to mess with multiple edge loops, which is simply to say you add X loops evenly spaced between all of them. So they're evenly spaced from one another on the edges. So if I delete this, let me bring in a fresh cylinder. So I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, Options Box, and then it brings it up. So you'll see there's an option here. By default, it's on relative distance from edge at the top. I'm going to switch it to multiple edge loops. So right now it's telling me add 2 edge loops. So when I click this, I'm dragging up and down. It's not letting me edit the location of the edge loops. It's just going to add 2 evenly spaced edge loops. So if I add n edge loops, I get n plus 1 subdivided sections. So if I get, this was originally one big long face here, right? And I add 2 edges, giving me now 3 subdivisions in this face. So then I could do things like I could increase this to 5 and click in here. And so now I can scale like this. I'm holding control and deselecting these. Now I have this like knuckle. So again, that's just me using the scale tool with some edge loops I just added. And when in doubt, you always, this is the most important part of any tool, is the reset tool button. So never forget it, reset tool. When in doubt, go reset your tool. So now it won't add 5 edge loops every time I do it. All right. Let us do this. So going forward from here, we're going to talk a little bit about how to make selections more customized. So I just talked about using control to deselect an edge loop. So most of you should be familiar with the concept of using shift to add things to your selections, pretty ubiquitous amongst all things. So in Maya, shift is add and subtract, which makes a lot of sense. You can add things to selections. Also, if you hold shift and click on them, it'll remove them from your active selection. So it does double duty. But what is specific is using control just deselects things. So what does that look like? So if I have, going to our what we learned last week. So if I have this cube here and I subdivide it, 7 times, I can go into my face mode and sort of like we're doing the inverse of what we're doing on the crate. So if I wanted to, if I select everything, if I want to deselect everything but the interiors, or I want to deselect the interiors of my crate, so basically the opposite selection we made before, I can just hold control and drag across the middle and it will deselect. I could also hold shift and it will add and subtract, but if I just hold control, it only subtracts. So you can see I'm making the same selection holding control and nothing's happening because control only deselects. So then I could go over here, control deselect, whoops. All right. Then I can extrude, increase my thickness, which we'll talk about in a second. And there we go. There's another way of making your crate. Instead of extruding it in, I extruded it out using thickness. So again, I'm going to show you that more in a second. All right. So that's add and subtract. So again, if you have loops of things that you want to add, so shift double clicking an edge, that's going to give you the edge loop. If you want to, let's see, so if I hold shift, add all of these loops. If I just want to deselect a loop, I'm going to hold control and double click it, and it deselects the whole loop. And that brings us to our selection modifiers here. So if you want to select an edge loop and you're in edge selection mode, which is an important thing to note, just hold shift, double click a loop, selects the whole loop. Okay, if it's able to select a whole loop. Sometimes it'll select only up to, where the edge terminates, like at a triangle or something. Now, when you're using faces, there's some nuance to this. Okay, so if I'm in select faces and I want to do what's called a select range. So we can use select range to select an entire loop of faces, but it is, as a whole, the concept is select range. It's just you can select the range all of a loop, so to speak. So what that looks like, if I just shift double click a face on this object, it's going to select all of the faces on the object. Okay, so we don't want to do that. So if I select this face here and shift double click over to here, it will select everything between these faces. So that is a select range. Now, to the point I was just making, if you want to select range all, the loop, you would click one face, shift double click the face next to it, and then it will select the range, which is all of the faces around the other direction, basically, right? So if you want to select a range of faces all the way around, shift click one, shift click the face next to it, goes all the way around. Sometimes, though, important to note, if your selection screws up, if you say, you know, don't, if you don't do it quick enough, oh, I guess I'm too good at Maya. So sometimes your selections get screwed up. You can just Control Z back to when it's not screwed up, and then say, you know, shift double click here. See, it's not going to work. So I'd need to shift click, shift double click freshly, and it'll get the rest of the things selected. All right. And that brings us to, so selecting a range. You're selecting a starting component, and then you shift double click where you want the component to connect to. If it's an entire loop, you click the one that's directly next to it in whichever direction is appropriate. So if you want to expand your selection, that is using the period and comma keys, also known as the caret keys for the little arrows on them next to the M on the keyboard. So expands and adds nearby components to your active selection. So here's what that looks like. If I grab this face here, and I hit shift and caret and I tap, you see it grows the selection of the faces around it. Tap it again, selects the faces around it, tap it again. You see. So that is grow selection. So you'll see that more in a second. So that's it for the notes portion. So we're going to transition into demoing the assignment. So I'm going to pause the video real quick. All right, so that brings us to the main event. So before we get into making our Rubik's Cube in Maya, we are going to talk about just sort of the method of how I arrived on, or the thought process that brought me to the method that we're going to follow. So hopefully everyone is familiar with the concept of a Rubik's Cube, and this is not the first time you've ever heard of one. But long story short, so our Rubik's Cubes have 9 sectors on each side of the Rubik's Cube that, you know, when solved, will all be the same color, right? So our Rubik's Cube will not be posable. Like, it's not like, so you couldn't actually spin it. It's going to appear like a Rubik's Cube. So, but for that method, we do need to have the gaps that would otherwise be spinning the sectors on each side. So to that, we have our 9 sectors and then 2 gaps running in each direction on each side of the cube. So that means for our width in any one, or width, height, or depth in any one of those directions, because it's a cube, let's make a math problem that would help us decide what the length of the cube is going to be in Maya. Okay, so it's going to follow X, Y, Z type formula. So Z being what the factor is going to be in Maya. So Z is what is going into Maya. So when we are making a cube, what we are going to decide first is how many times we should divide this cube up to make the shape that we want to make. Okay, and I'm going to walk you through the process. So how many edges, or subdivisions rather, excuse me, do we want to add? So our Z is that number. So we have, in each direction, we have 3 sectors, right? So I have 3 sectors, which I'll denote as X. So we have 3X plus our 2 gaps, so plus 2Y equals Z, whatever number we're putting into Maya. Okay, and this is just a loose calculation, and so a lot of this is just up to our decisions. Now, the gaps are very small comparatively to the size of the sectors, right? So because we want the gaps to be very narrow, we want to have a very large ratio in size between the size of our sectors and the size of our gaps. Because we're going to arbitrarily make some decisions about what X and Y should be. So for me, what we want is that our y value should be 1, which means that our gap is 1 subdivision in width. So what that 1 subdivision means and relative to the rest of it is what we're going to basically decide. So we now have 3x plus 2 equals z, essentially, because I've told you that y, the width of the gaps of our are going to be 1 subdivision. Okay, so again, we're talking about these tiny little gaps are going to be 1 subdivision. So what value for x, as in what is the ratio in width that we want to use for the width of this sector comparative to the width of this, when we are saying the width of the gap is going to be 1. Okay, so I settled on a relatively large number, which is at a ratio of 11 to 1. And why I chose an odd number will be relevant in a second. Okay, so it being an odd number does matter. So again, this is just mostly arbitrary decisions about how we're going to be making our cube based on methods. So with our gaps being 1 and an 11 to 1 ratio for the size, so that brings us to 3x, so 3 times 11, which is to say 11 faces plus 1, 11 faces plus 1 plus 11 equals 35. So 35, again, is an arbitrary number that I came up with by deciding upon a ratio of width of 11 to 1 from the width of the sectors to the width of the gaps. That's the main takeaway. I'm just trying to explain my thought process. For those of you that are trying to any percent this is when you're going to start doing your thing. So I've come to the conclusion that 35 subdivisions is what I want for this object. So I have my object selected in object mode. I'm going to go to my Polycube inputs and add 35 subdivisions. So it should look like this. Now here's the bonus round. So again, the answer is subdivisions equal. N is 35. So that being said, to my point that I made earlier, if I want n subdivisions on an object, or I guess I should say n edges creates n plus 1 subdivisions. So if I want 35 subdivisions, I need to add -1, so 34 edges. So if I wanted the same effect using the insert edge loop tool, I'd have to do multiple edge loops 34. No, I don't suggest you do this method, but just so you can see it. So boom, boom, boom. And then you end up with the same outcome as if you just change the subdivisions value to 35. Okay, so let me reset this. Whoops. Okay, so going back, restarting, just a blank cube here. So again, n equals 35. Great. Now, bringing you back to our math equation, we decided that 3x plus 2 equals 35. X is 11, which means that our gap is the 12th and 24th face, or row of faces, or column of faces on each side. So the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to switch into face mode. And this is where I ask you to be patient and to count appropriately. So you only have to do this once. Spacebar, and also Alt and middle mouse button for panning the camera might be what you're asking. Alt and middle mouse button for pan the camera. So we're counting for the 12th and 24th row and or column. So you should end up with 6 fully selected rows and or columns. How did you select subdivision? Are you talking about... in object mode, you select it, and then you click on inputs, and then you change these values here. So I'm going to switch into face mode, and I'm going to count 12th and 24. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I'm going to shift click shift double click, that gets the whole 12th column. And again, I'm going to keep holding shift 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yep, 10, 11, 12. Shift click, shift double click. All right, so that's the 12th and 24th column. Now I'll do it this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Shift click, shift double click. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Whoops. And so see, I screwed up my selection there. Undo, undo. So shift click, shift double click. I get it. Yeah, okay. All right, that seems right. And then one final time, so I'll do it in this direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Shift click, shift double click. Yeah. And finally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Shift click, shift double click. So if you do it right, you should end up with these faces selected. And I just threw it into isolate select so you can more or less see the shape that it's going to make. So we are selecting the gaps in our Rubik's Cube, and that's what we're going to press into our object. Okay? Now, your mileage may vary with this next step, so be mindful of what I'm saying and just keep your eyes peeled. So, step 1 was making the cube and adding the subdivisions. Step 2 was selecting the appropriate 6 rows and columns of faces. Step 3 is adding your extrude and lowering the thickness to a negative number. So I'm going to add an extrude. You should see this little poly extrude 1 box pop up. And again, I can't stress enough. 1 extrude. That's it. You only extrude once. So if you're doing it more than once, you're doing it wrong. So I have my extrude made. My thickness value. Now your first instinct, and this is why we do this now, because I realized I have been doing it in a dumb way for many years, and I will show you why. So your first instinct would be to grab this blue arrow. Do not do that. Using this thickness value, I'm going to hover over the word thickness, and I'm going to lower it to -0.1, which is way too much. So you can see that when I do that, the faces break here, and I can see the back side of these faces, which is why they're black. So I'm going to put in -0.05 in my thickness box. Oh wow, it's still too much. Okay, -0.025. Nice. And so see, that's what you're gonna get there. So you'll see these nice crisp edges here. And also you can go under your extrude history settings and find the thickness value and edit it there too if your box went away for whatever reason, or you're just not you didn't get it right and then you clicked off and the box went away, whatever. So it's under the history or the inputs for the poly extrude. You can just go find it in there. And so when you've done it, it'll look like this. Should have nice crisp edges. Okay, I see a question in the chat. I will get to that in a second. But so I do want to revisit. So if I undo this back, what if I just use the blue arrow? So what if I extrude this and use the blue arrow? So you'll see that it looks it's mostly fine, but then if you look at the corners, you'll see that the corners don't really move in. And so you get these bent corners that you have to go back and fix manually. So this is the difference between editing thickness and translating something. So again, you want to use a negative thickness value that is apparently really small unless you make your cube bigger. So When I try to add a new edge loop, the edge loop I did before disappears. I would need to probably see that to edit it, or to help you with that. Okay, so let me undo this though and finish the fight. So I'm going to extrude. My thickness is negative 0.025 apparently. Okay. Great. Final step. You want to color your Rubik's Cube. So I'm going to go into face mode. And I'm going to select the middle face. In fact, because I'm enterprising, I'm going to go into this mode. Oh, this is going to be tough. Okay, so I'm going to click and drag holding shift, and it should be selecting through my object to the other side. So this will allow me to grab... Oh, I don't want to select both sides at the same time. Okay, fair enough. I'm just being extra for no reason. Okay, so there's that. And I'm selecting... I guess I should do it in this view so you guys have a better ability to see what I'm doing. Oh, I'm even wrong too. Okay, so select there, and select there. So 5 faces in each direction. And I'm selecting the middle of each of these sectors because I want to add a material to them to color them. So again, I have 5 faces in each direction because this is an 11 by 11 sector. So now when I tap shift and caret 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now I have the outsides of this entire side selected. And then I can just go assign a blend. And this will be red. So same thing over here. Grab this face, 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 this face. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this time I'll assign a new blend, and this time it will be blue. Oh, there's blue right here. Etc., etc. Okay, good. Person, I think you got it. Very good to hear. So, etc., etc. So you should have a 6-sided Rubik's Cube that is colored with... If you feel so inclined to fix the gaps, you can, but leaving them gray is fine. I only expect you to color the outsides of the Rubik's Cube. Easy way to do it would be to start by just coloring the whole cube black, and then as you add the new textures, you'll get left with only the gaps being black, but that's just if you care that much. So, the deliverable, though, is a 6-sided textured cube. So, again, you'll just repeat that until you add white, orange, black, and yellow are the 4 remaining colors I haven't added yet. So, you will just complete this Rubik's Cube. So, I'll just add one more so we can sort of see what the final one's going to look like. Oops. There we go. Got that. And then we'll assign a blend, and this will be white. And there you go. All right. Thanks for watching.